Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, folks. Welcome to today's topic. We're going to be talking about a very important topic today. We're going to be talking about school safety, school emergencies. On my channel, once again, we are always going to be talking about security items, safety education, and training. And my name, once again, is Charles McNamara. You can find me on LinkedIn. Training and education is my background for the most part. And we're talking about school safety and reunification. Today, folks, I got a really, really good subject matter expert. Who's going to be talking about school safety, security, emergencies, fire, non-fire. As a member of the Idaho Office of School Safety and Security, great guest. Give it up today, folks, from my guest, Guy. Welcome. Hello. How are you?
I'm well, and you?
Doing good, doing good. I want to say thank you very, very much for doing this. I know, I was reading an article through ASIS, loved it, and I knew I had to reach out and try and get you on to talk about some of these things, which I know are very near and dear to your heart for what you do on a day-to-day basis. But if you could just tell the little people about you, where you're from, the type of work that you do. Once again, thank you so much for joining.
Well, Charles, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Guy Bliesner. I was a longtime high school coach and teacher. I did what many of us do, and that's when you find out you don't make a lot of money in the classroom, you transition into what we call the dark side and go to administration. And I my administrative post for about 9 years was health, safety, and security director in a mid-sized school district here in Idaho. I began that, and I call it a crusade in um, approximately '06, and have been involved in school safety and security issues ever since. I was part of the founding membership of Idaho's Office of School Safety and Security, now the School Safety and Security Program of our state board. Three of us were involved in helping write the legislation that created our office. So I'm one of the few people in state government that gets to say I created the job I have, and
Wow.
it has been a 20-year crusade for me. It just has been something that has always been very, very close to me. When I started, immediately following my start was the Sandy Hook shooting, and shortly after that, the Nickel Mines incident. And those issues caused me to reevaluate the things that were important to me, and keeping my children, then my grandchildren, and their children safe became a critical element for me. So that's where I started this, and I've been involved in this process for about the last 22 years.
Wow. Very nice. So I've been in, my industry, security management, training and education for, it's crazy to think now, about 20 years. I got into this after I got out of the military. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But I know that I had a passion for security training and education. I found you because I am a member of ASIS, and I read this magazine, which I think anyone who is in security should be a part of. A great way to just stay up to date with what's going on in your city, in the state, kind of in the world. Keeps you up to date. This was a really, really good article that was on the cover page, the big freeze about Texas. But when I opened it up, this is the article I found and I read, and I fell in love with it for two reasons. I teach a lot of security officers, coming into the industry. And I also teach with New York City Fire Department, their fire and life safety director course. And one of the articles that you wrote is an orderly reunification. We're going to talk about this, throughout the evening. But in a short summary of your words, what is reunification?
Well, we started at a goal. What's the goal? Let's get the right kid to the right person and prove you did it. And so for that, we believe you then go to the definition, and that's the process used to return a child in your school's care to an authorized adult in anything other than your normal end of day process with positive documentation that it took place. I got to looking back, and I've been to 107 active shooter trainings, and they run anywhere from 4 hours to 8 hours to 2 days, 16 hours. And at the end of them, the person teaching the course says, we have now spent between 4 and 16 hours on the 5 to 7 minutes of an active shooting event. And at the end of the training, they say, and the school will reunify students with their parents. And everybody walks out. Well, you have just spent 16 hours on the 7 to 10 minutes of the event. You're now going to spend 30 seconds to a minute and a half on what's going to be the next 6 hours of chaos in your life. So one of those things that I believe is we need to focus on that process, because it is the gateway between response and recovery. If you don't get those kids back to their parents in a timely fashion, you want the chicks back with the hen. You want mama to have those kids around her, and then they begin to feel safe and start that processing of the event.
I read the article. Like I said, I fell in love with it for a lot of different reasons, and we're going to talk a little bit about that article as well as some topics that we previously discussed. I had received questions from many people on LinkedIn, so I kind of compiled a list, which we'll bring up as well. But you talk about potential threats, kindergarten children, all the way up to high school, right? K through 12, civil unrest, right. Protests, yep. Riots, intruders, unwanted guests, assault, battery, rapes, drugs, weapons, gang-related issues, accidental injuries, maybe on the playground, or death, intentional injuries, automobile accidents, utility failures, natural disasters, severe weather, which we've got in New York right now, fires and active shooters. I mean, that's a lot to cover, training wise. So I'd like to kind of know your thoughts, because on my side, I always think about like the security officer or the peace officer who is there. But what could parents possibly do to be involved in this process as well?
Well, one of the things that we absolutely recommend, first of all, Idaho is very much a local control state, and each school district has their board, their school board, and they make those decisions statutorily for their campuses by Idaho law. So what we try and recommend is that they look at, and the FEMA term is multi-hazard planning. What we want is the fewest number of potential responses that covers the greatest number of possible events. When I took my first classroom, they gave me a flipboard. It started at asteroids and ended in zombies and had a unique process for everything you could imagine in between. There was no way to train that. There was no way to implement that. There was no reality to expect that the person, if it ever went down, was going to grab their flip card and look up what that was and look through the process as you were trying to respond. So one of the elements that we looked for here in Idaho was that let's create a common response platform that works for as many possible things as you can imagine.
So one of the questions that I got, which makes sense, where can one review a school's current safety plan? So if a parent wanted to know, what a school is doing in the event of an emergency for X, are they able to come and see that information?
Depends on where you are and what it is by statute. Certainly in Idaho, they're available to them, and it's at the EOP or Emergency Operations Plan level at the school. Very much, we strongly recommend that parents are a part of the school safety committee as they're making those determinations. That does not mean that they need to understand all of the tactical movement that's involved and every nuance, but they need to know, one, that there is a plan, that their kids are going to be first considered in that plan, and that parents are, and what parents are expected to do. If you get notified that X is happening at your school, what do you want a parent to do? So we strongly recommend that. And that's one of those things. Have that conversation with the administrator of your building. Say, what happened? What do you want from me when I get the notification? So that, in Idaho, we can have, it's a little tough. We've had situations where a potential active shooter situation took place at one of our schools about 2.5 years ago, and we had a father show up with his weapon and start walking the area. He nearly was ventilated by a state police officer who was on the perimeter of that building because he was there as an unknown person carrying a weapon. So again, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to react? What do we expect? And quite frankly, one of the things we've found is if parents are comfortable with who's in charge, they know you have a plan and that you're going to keep them in the loop. And that's the critical element. The communications piece going out, you have the most precious possession a parent has in their children. They are going to be concerned if you maintain a good stream of outgoing information. It will lower the level of anxiety for people. So that PIO or crisis information position is a critical element in response.
In your article, which I have here, and folks, once again, you should really check this out. Also has many other interesting articles that will help you as a parent, help you and your child prepare for emergencies, which I tell people, every 6 months you should be checking your go bag, your shelter in place kit, but also your emergency plans, not just for home and work, but if you have children in school. One of the things that you talk about is the sufficient availability of well-trained staff. And you're not just talking about, the security staff, you're talking about the actual educators, support staff, and administrative staff as well, right?
Absolutely. Reunification is deceptively labor intensive if you're going to process it in any meaningful time frame. And that means that, all of the folks in your district service center may show up and help run it. Because again, if the triggering event is traumatic, about the best you can hope for a classroom teacher is they'll keep their kids in a huddle and know where they are. They've been traumatized as well. So we have to look at that. Here in Idaho, with a large number of small districts and remote areas, there are districts who have put together community-based reunification teams that they exercise a couple of times a year, and that's just a group text to a bunch of folks who are going to show up and come in alongside the educators and expand their ability. We believe an educator always has to be involved because it's their responsibility legally for the children. But helping process and move people and do those things is certainly an element that can be done that way. One thing I want to add to your, check your emergency go bag. I will tell you that nationally, between 1/4 and 1/3 of the student information we have in student information systems in schools is incorrect as to contact information. Numbers change, addresses change. Keep that information updated. They can't get a hold of you if they don't know where you're at.
So important. Probably one of the hardest pieces of responding to any emergency is always communication. So folks, great tip right there. You mentioned this earlier, and I'll bring this up again. Reunification takes time, and each emergency is different in its own way. With a fire, you might be evacuating that facility. So it may not be feasible for parents to come to the actual location because you're exiting to an assembly area. Whereas if you have a weather event, you might be keeping students inside and sheltering in place. And then you'd have to deal with, thousands of phone calls to the property as well.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why, that we called it crisis communication, but that how do I communicate with people who are affected by the event, but not directly involved. And by that, I mean the parents, guardians, folks who are not in the building where it's happening, but are going to be worried about their children. And you have to let them know where their kids are going to be, what you want them to do. Please, we're at the Methodist Church on the corner of Fifth and Spruce, and please come in the east parking. Let people know where you want them. And again, from a tactical standpoint, you may not be able to give them all of that information as a pre-done piece. If we have to leave the building, we're going to be an X, because you don't know. We had a school who was doing a full-scale exercise, failed to clear it with the facility they were using for relocation, and they walked into a funeral.
Wow.
So you have to understand that these buildings, particularly if you don't own them as school folks, are under the care and control of somebody else. You have to work with them, have that MOU. How are you going to notify them? What do you get? All of those elements that are.
Got a good question actually from Mike Foster. It's kind of off topic, but it relates to children in schools. What is your opinion on the upcoming regulations for children being vaccinated to go to school or to daycare?
Okay.
Good question.
I'm going to do this in the best possible cover my rear end fashion that you would know. This is not the things we're talking about are general principles. They are not the endorsed position of the School Safety and Security Program of the state of Idaho. These are Guy Bliesner's opinions, so that we understand I'm not speaking for our organization, I'm speaking for myself. Vaccination, and unfortunately with COVID, we have turned what should have been a public health issue into a giant political disaster.
Yes.
And more so in some of the more conservative areas. Idaho is a highly conservative, probably the reddest of the red states. And that means that, mandates of any kind to do anything are extremely difficult from a political standpoint. So I will tell you that I am vaccinated and I have been boosted, and I encourage, my wife has as a teacher. I think it's probably the safest way to go, but I do understand those folks who are concerned about the speed with which the vaccine came about. Until you do the history and understand that had been under development as a process for a number of years prior, it just fell well. So again, for myself, I chose vaccination. I think it makes the most sense.
I think it's a good question that you have there, and everybody should be able to make their best educated decision, based on information that they have. I will kind of say the same thing as well. This is just, Charlie Mack's opinion from Brooklyn, New York, taking no political stance. And, it's unfortunate, like you said, I'm in a blue state, a lot of mixed red and blue in New York, but it's more of a blue state. And it seems that we have really, dug our feet in the sand on political lines with these things. But wherever you kind of fall on this issue, that is your choice. But taking basic precautions, taking steps to keep you and your children healthy is important. Having a good diet, having a good exercise, taking your vitamins, and everybody laughs like, Charlie, what are you, Hulk Hogan? But one of my first videos that I did was actually with some health consultants and a fitness expert, and it's just so important to take care of yourself as well. Seems silly, the mask thing has been like something that you have to kind of change out. Make sure you have the proper mask. You and I both are in the safety realm, with OSHA. You can't wear the same mask 17 days in a row. You've got to change them.
Well, and the real issue that we've come up against here is that schools, by their nature, and educators hate the idea that they're considered the largest daycare center in the county, but they serve that purpose as well. And if you send your kid to school because you have to go to work and they're a little bit sick, you're going to spread. So it's a whole litany of public health related issues that are not just COVID related. They are, it's conjunctivitis and mumps and measles and a whole litany of things that impact them.
One of the other things too is, and it kind of goes back to the training side with educators and security staff. People may have strong beliefs about certain things, and you have an unwanted visitor, that approaches the scene, which may become hostile, and other people have to get involved. Kind of ties in, to the next question. Do schools have resource officers or police officers? I know in each state they're kind of called different things and they have different roles. So,
yeah, here in Idaho, there are school districts that have their own sworn police forces. LA Unified is one of those. Some in Texas. That's not the approach in Idaho, nor the approach largely for public schools. They use an SRO or a school resource officer, generally a officer with good people skills who has had some training. Schoolwork is community policing on steroids. And a good SRO is one of the best things a school can have, and a poor one is one of the worst. It has to be that person who can integrate themselves to that school possible and work cooperatively with the administration, yet maintain a understanding of the difference of a sworn law enforcement individual and an administrator. The National Organization of School Resource Officers, or NASRO, is from my perspective the premier training organization for school-based policing. They offer a number of trainings, and we strongly recommend it for those officers in Idaho that serve in schools. The problem you run up against is in a school with 1,000, 1,500, or 2,500 high school kids. A full-time SRO makes a great deal of sense. A full-time SRO in a 600-kid neighborhood elementary school, we're going to bore that fellow completely to death. And so you need to look at what is effective use of a resource.
Absolutely. Especially in New York, we have a lot of kids in schools. So, we have, school safety, which is an extension of the NYPD. Got a couple of people saying hello. Thank you for joining. Appreciate you guys jumping in. Really, really important to have a good relationship with them. So we're kind of looking at this video topic, folks, from all different aspects, not just, the security officer or like the fire safety manager or like the principal. It's an all hands on deck approach is what I like to say. Next question that came in, which is a really good one. How can students and parents provide ongoing feedback to school leaders on the climate in their classroom or school? I think this is a really, really good question. Social media is great.
Well, I think it's an incredibly important question. I presented at the Ed Spaces Campus Safety Conference in Pittsburgh about 2.5 months ago. And I was in front of a group of largely police folks. And I said, I want to give you the secret to school safety and security. And they all leaned forward and looked closely. And I said, it's climate and culture that keeps us safe first. And it absolutely is. And from that, I don't just mean climate and culture, because as an educator, I know that that's critically important for educational, for learning. Mm-hmm. But it's also equally important that you develop a detection culture, a culture that if you are concerned about your friend, it's an upstander culture, not a bystander culture. It's a see something, say something culture. I was in an elementary school in rural Idaho doing an assessment. Often when I enter, I take my credential and put it in my pocket so that it's not seen and walk down the hall. The first open door I went by, a little second grade boy, eyes got big, and he pointed and said, "Teacher, he doesn't have a tag." And the next 3 doors I went past, it happened to me again. I went back and asked, how did this happen, of their superintendent, who is an educator I respect immensely. And Molly said, I gave all of my administrators $200, told them to buy candy bars, and tell all their students they get a candy bar when they identify anybody who isn't properly credentialed. That includes their teachers. Because in small towns, teachers will say, why do I need a tag? Why do I need an ID? Everybody knows me. That's not why we wear an ID. We wear an ID to create a cultural expectation that adults on campus who belong are identified in some fashion. Then we can have the kids playing Where's Waldo? He doesn't have a tag.
It's funny too, because that's one of the things, we teach our security guards, ID, check ID, check ID. But you have, students K through 12 pointing that stuff out. It helps them prepare for emergencies. It helps them prepare for a better culture in their location.
And a teacher hates getting rung up by a student. Of all the things they detest, that's on the list. That's like misspelling something on the whiteboard.
No detention for that kid. It should get extra candy. Absolutely.
Exactly.
One of the things I thought that was amazing, and sometimes we forget these things as well. During the emergency, parents should sometimes assume that you may not always know where the students are. And that doesn't mean that they're lost. There just has to be an accounting piece as well. You have to, get to your assembly area together, account for everybody together, because it's going to be a flow of communication that's going back and forth. Parents should have the mindset of telling their children when they go to school, they do need to listen to the educators, and they do need to listen to the security staff, or the SROs and the peace officers. Because if we have to move, we want to move as a unit.
Absolutely. One of the things how can students and parents provide ongoing feedback? The first thing is, I'm an absolute believer in a confidential or anonymous tip line process, so that if you have a concern, you can send it in. I'm also a believer that on a school safety committee, there should be parents. If the students are of an age, maybe not at all meetings, but there should be a safety committee for students that you can have those. And they should be a different group than the kids who have been elected to student body office. All of those kids, the kids who know, you want to know where things happen in a school, go to a remedial math or reading class and ask those kids. They'll tell you.
One question, that I think every parent wants to know, what are the current threats that, people should be prepared for? I've rattled off like 12 of them, and each area is going to be a little different. I live in a pretty big city, crime, gang violence are always like the big ones in schools. School shootings are big, but case by case.
Well, school shootings are huge, and they're huge because they make lots and lots of noise and they get a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. The reality is that for most educators, you're 2.5 times more likely to be struck by lightning. But if you happen to win the bad lottery, it doesn't matter what the statistics are. So you must prepare. That's equally the same for non-custodial abduction. There are 4 or 5 times the number of non-custodial abductions that there are school shootings annually. And that's because of societal issues, we become the arbitrators of problems on occasion. And so we have to look at that as educators. Schools are simply a microcosm of the society they serve. Those things that could affect the society that they serve could affect the school. If you're in Tornado Alley, severe weather's a reality. Here in Idaho, extreme cold and snow is going to be, for us, a reality. It was 9 degrees below zero this morning. So that's a reality. But it also means that, the other things, know what kids are, what kids are talking about and what they're doing, and listen to those things. So those threats are there. There are interior threats and exterior threats. The outside threats, quite frankly, are easier to deal with. I mean, that's create a secure perimeter, deal with good visitor practice, all of the elements that are physical security elements. Interior threats are much more difficult. and that's the bullying and the nastiness that happens. And I've been to schools and I ask how much bullying is there. If they tell me none, I tell them they're lying to me, because everywhere that groups of humans get together, there are adverse interactions, and these are humans in training at schools. We are teaching them how, we're socializing them, teaching them how to act in groups. So some bullying and misbehavior, and one of my very favorite administrators called it general nitwittery, takes place. They're kids. The definition of kid is they go places you don't want them to go and they do stuff you don't want them to do. That's why we call them children. So treat them as such. But so those are the threats that you want to look at, and that means being tied in with your student, talking to them about their day, ask them what's going on, and then become involved in your school. Most schools have a parent support group, whether it's parent teacher organizations or volunteer readers, or we always tell people find a way to serve on your school safety committee, because those things are things that it benefits the administrator to know what the parents are concerned about, because a lot of times they'll be making plans for stuff that people really don't care about.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So do those things.
One of the things, which kind of ties into the next question, actually. So I'll just kind of bring it up right now. The actual step-by-step process for reunification. Someone had mentioned this to me through LinkedIn, and I kind of want to know your thoughts, because I know that there's always going to be a trade-off with security and privacy. Like Apple has these things called ID tags or Apple tags, so you kind of know the location of things. Some parents said, would it be a good idea to kind of keep them on your students?
There are some school districts that have done that, particularly folks who run large transportation organizations, so that they check a kid onto a bus, off a bus, into the school, out of the school, that kind of thing. A lot of that, quite frankly, is a local control issue. I will tell you that would be very, very difficult to run here in conservative Idaho, because it does smack of Big Brother a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But there are places where it's a trade-off. You are giving up something to gain something. Security and convenience are polar opposites, if you will.
Yes.
The more of one you have, the less of the other is a necessity. And each school and school district and school community, which is what we look at, it's not just a school, it's a school community. It's all of the folks who interact with that organization, but they have to pick that balancing point on the teeter-totter for themselves.
I always say too, I think most children, maybe not all, they have a cell phone on them, so they can kind of use that as a way to just monitor their location, but that's not always going to help when there's an emergency. They have to kind of get through that emergency first, and that's one big thing I always talk about in training. Recording it is okay, but you got to handle that emergency no matter what it is.
Well, and unfortunately, if you rely on technology, at some point it will fail you. And then we've all gone to the convenience store to buy a cup of coffee, and the poor young lady who's just running herself ragged behind there says, I can't do that because my cash register doesn't work. Imagine how well that's going to go over when you tell a parent you can't give them their kid because your computer doesn't function.
The perfect example is they so many different apps out there, checking in, checking out. It might be that exact moment the battery dies, or there is a loss in a Wi-Fi signal. I'm old school training.
Or the tower drops out because it's simply overwhelmed, which is, we've seen that in a number of school emergencies in the AARs.
So we'll talk about AARs in just a second, because people kind of wanted to know the reunification process. Let's say there's an automobile accident. This is fairly common, I think, in most jurisdictions, where if there's a automobile accident happens to happen on their playground, would students be instructed to kind of shelter in place and stay where they are? They're going to be released back to their parents?
Depends entirely on the determination. And for us, that's always a determination made by school officials at the school at the time. And the trigger point, or the toggle switch point we call, is when are the children going to be safer in the care and control of their parents than in the care and control of the school. So that's what a school, when a school makes that process. And reunification can happen for 101 different things. It may be because you have a protracted power outage and it's projected to run for another 7 hours. Schools get cold.
Hmm.
But if you just turn kids loose, the home is likely cold and mom and dad may not be there. So you have to look at what that process means, because for educators, at the point that you give us your child, we stand in the place of the parent. It's called in loco parentis. We have to give them the same due diligence and care that you would as a parent until we return them to you. So for us, the trigger on reunification process is when you do anything, when you release in other than your normal and expected end of day process.
You know, one of the other things too, and I'm pretty sure it's jurisdiction by jurisdiction in New York, a lot of the schools become emergency shelters, on cold weather days or emergency days. So, there's another
Yep.
aspect, that we need to be prepared for as well.
Oh, absolutely. And, most of the schools in Idaho are written into their county emergency mitigation plan as shelter locations and feeding locations. And because they have kitchens, they have showers, they have lots of bathrooms, they have those things. So, yeah, absolutely.
Auditoriums for
And
voting, yeah.
yeah, well, and the voting one is the one that causes me the most concern, because we're up against two kind of competing needs there. Free and open access to a polling place is an absolute critical element for democracy. Free and open access to a school is something that causes me deep concern. How do we, so what portion of the building do we wall off for that process versus, and some buildings are better suited to it than others, with
Hmm.
exterior exits and entrances to those areas, So again, it's a case by case basis, but the from my perspective, the bottom line always has to be, is this the care that you would have expected for your child?
You know, um, this actually just kind of has come from multiple people, and I think this is being uh, sensationalized in the news. But interesting topic. What are your thoughts on calling for teachers and staff to be armed for active shooter events? I know me as an educator, if I'm teaching, I really don't want to worry about that. Being prior military, something I'm for, but as an educator, it's kind of walking a fine line.
Well, I'm before I go forward again, this is one that is my perspective, not our offices, because this is an issue of debate right now in the Idaho legislature. Idaho school boards have had for 100 years the ability to choose to arm anyone they choose on their campus. So a school board can allow anybody they choose to carry. Um, the problem that I have is kind of threefold. Is everybody, and I'm a gun guy. My wife tells me I could invade a small third world country if I chose, and I'm no longer allowed to go to Cabela's or Sportsman's Warehouse without adult supervision. So,
And take away your
in
credit card.
exactly. But in that case, it's everybody, too many people, not everybody, but too many people think in the moment they are going to be Chuck Norris. And the reality is, in the moment, they will be Barney Fife, because of the training element that's involved in that. Secondarily, many school folks, not all, but many, are not psychologically well suited to that process. When that individual comes into your sight picture, and here in rural Idaho, it may be a kid that you've coached for 2 years. He's been in sleepovers at your house. Your kid's been at his. All of those things. Are you going to engage with that child at that moment? So
you know, I
there's
I
that issue.
I would, it's actually one of the things that I think about as a nightmare scenario as well. You may have a great relationship with a student, and unfortunately, that student might be the one who is the active threat. You may think you're able to talk them down in the moment, but in reality, maybe you don't. Like, that's just like one scenario that I think of
Well,
would be.
and the reality is, in most urban or more or urban and even many suburban areas, you're between 90 seconds and 3 minutes of response.
Hmm.
And the issue that came out of the Secret Service report from Sandy Hook, we know that a properly locked classroom door has not been breached in an active school shooting situation. It has not happened.
That's true. Hmm.
So, so that becomes an element of understanding. The other one is when those people in blue or black Nomex arrive, and I'm that 26-year-old first-year teacher waving my Loudenboomer in the air, and they come through the door and see me, chances are I'm going to be ventilated. The other one is most schools' construction is not conducive to a running gunfight over the back of children. We're going to penetrate walls.
Yeah, I was just about to say cover and concealment, two things to also consider. Not ideal, and it's not going to happen in most schools.
Well, and if you're in some of our schools here in Idaho have looked at something that's a little akin to the air marshal model. It's those people that rural places have done this for fire and EMS for years. And in Texas, they call it a school marshal program. But it's those individuals who go through a abbreviated post training. They don't do any of the traffic stop stuff and all of that. They go through an abbreviated training, and they are sworn and carry under the color of authority. They train with their local responders so that they know who they are. And there's a process to identify them if they choose to engage in those actions. And some areas in Idaho, it's 30 minutes to cell service.
Hmm.
A well-trained individual who works commonly with your local responders, who has been vetted through their process and is in that, makes more sense to me than just if you got it, carry them if you got them. I just am that way.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider too. It's like I said, everybody kind of brings this one up, like, yeah, or arm all the teachers, and that may not be the best approach for a number of reasons. But what
Well, it
happens if
also
someone fails to qualify? Now do you lose a teacher?
well, it also means that we're not going to do a lot of the other things that we should do. They're going to say, give everybody a gun. We're done.
Hmm.
And it means that the only thing we're willing to do is have a running gunfight over the back of our kids. And I'm very much a left of bang kind of guy. I think we know that 83 to 85% of school teachers or school shooters, depending on your definition of school shooting, are our own kids. We know they exhibit issues. That means that behavioral threat assessment and management tools properly applied will not only keep us from having a school shooting, but we save the kid who would have been the shooter as well.
Hmm. We were talking about this before we got started, but the model has kind of always been run, hide, fight. But you guys take a different approach, right?
Right. We did this, it's been 8 years ago when Houston PD initially, probably more than that, probably 12 now, but Houston PD came out with the run, hide, fight model under the Department of Defense's grant program that they did that under. And run, hide, fight makes some assumptions we can't make in a school. One is that you have no fiduciary duty to anybody but you. When you've got 26 first graders, you can't make that assumption. And run to a teacher means an undirected movement as fast as you can away. Hide is cower in a corner, and fight is go hit somebody in the face and engage them actively, go down the hall looking for the opportunity. None of those things fit the planning assumptions in a K-12 environment. We morphed it to what we call MSD, or move, secure, defend. Move with purpose, move away from danger to a place of safety is
Mhm.
the first one. And we talk about moving through an unknown threat environment. How do you do that? What does that look like? It's not full tactical movement training, but it's situational awareness movement training. And all of our protocols are options based. The teacher at the classroom level has to make the decision because the guy in the front office has no idea what's going on in the East Hall anyway. So that's move. Secure, based on the Sandy Hook report. Secured space. Well, there was one case, Red Lakes, Minnesota, in 98 or 99, that a locked classroom door was breached. But that was a student who was there to kill a specific teacher. They were looking for somebody. It wasn't just an active shooting event. So, but secure that space and secure it well, and then know that you have affirmative permission to defend yourself and your children. And defend is different. Every mama bear teacher in the world will defend their cubs. Most of them, you've got that kindly 35 or 40-year old kindergarten teacher. Fight's not in her vocabulary.
Mhm.
Defend certainly is. So that's move, secure, defend in the Idaho model.
It's good to have the proper attitude, but you have to have those skill sets along with it. Um,
Absolutely.
what type of post-incident services are available? So I know active shooter kind of always gets the big spotlight because it gets the headlines, but um, I think this is something parents should know, that schools have many different services available to them based on the different emergencies that may happen.
Well, and what's available is to some extent regional and occasionally even local. But the type of events, if it's a criminal event, victims advocacy comes into to play, and we saw that in our um, shooting at Rigby Middle School. Idaho has had one school shooting ever, and it happened last spring. And so that victims advocacy groups came in and provided ongoing counseling for staff and students on an ongoing basis. But what services are available are, again, somewhat regional. It's what kind of services are available for other things, and they can be similar. We know right now that mental health services for both students and teachers are stretched very, very thin based on the COVID issues. So it's difficult to access some of that, and it's being triaged a little bit. But again, there are mental health services inside a school with school counselors, school psychologists, sociologists, social workers, those kind of folks. And the larger the school district, the more prevalent those services are going to be.
Absolutely. Um, I think a lot of people that watch this now, or watch this later, after it's kind of posted, should really kind of take a moment, to look at their school's plans, try to get information, joining PTA associations and safety associations. There's a lot of post services as well. It's so important, and it could be something where it's a minor injury. Maybe a child gets hurt, on the playground, or maybe they get hurt at gym. It could also be the passing of another student. There are services that are available. There's pretty much multiple law enforcement and other agencies available to help with drugs and alcohol and addiction. So there's a lot of other services out there for parents that they can take advantage of. Um, talking about the values of plans, school districts and families, we all got to work together. Keep the kids safe, keep the educators safe, keep the administrative staff safe as well.
Well, and I read it, and I've written it in probably a dozen of the 50 or so articles I've published. But plans are critically important, and you have to have the plan. But plans do not respond to these things people do. The best
Mhm.
plan in the world sitting on the shelf does no good. a plan that is implementable, deployable, and sustainable. And by that, I mean you have to train your people what to do. It has to be implemented with fidelity when needed, and it has to be retrained. And the problem is, training is never one and done. And you know that in a way that many educators don't. We'll often train on the new math program, and we won't retrain until we change math programs. And that's not something you can do with response based plans and training.
Hmm. The great thing now, and I kind of said this in the beginning, is there's so much information out there that we can take. One of the reasons I created this YouTube channel, all different topics: security, safety, fire and life safety, first aid, education. I want to be able to connect people together who would be helpful, kind of live along the same lines of fire, life safety, education, executive protection. So we're there to help one another. But remember, you have to act, right? If there's an emergency, you've got to get involved. um, Communication, we talked about this a lot already. You mentioned it in your articles. Pathways may not be available during emergencies. So cell towers are big one. Everybody wants to pick up the phone right away and make a call.
I'm the communications. We do unified communications planning with school districts, and I'm the comms plan guy on our team. And everybody, when you ask how do you communicate, even to say the playground, they hold up their cell phone, and I said, good, dial the office. And as they start to dial, I stand behind them and make as much noise and scream at them as I can, and they can't dial. So and it's a one-to-one communications process. Schools need a one-to-many, a good radio-based one-to-many communications protocol. Doesn't mean to say that it needs to meet first responder needs. It
Mhm.
just needs to meet campus communications needs. And it needs to interface with the first responders when required. But the other thing is, how do we communicate? And one of the things we saw out of Rigby, first of all, if you're fighting to take cell phones away from kids, you're losing that battle. So engage them. If you want something to go out in text message, have your students on a mass text and send it along, and then you're controlling the message. It's not rumor controlled. Be aware that you may lose that cell tower, and the mass dialer you have may not be available, and your computer may go down. So it may be back to having a good connection with your local television and radio folks so that they can help you put that out in the old version of mass communications.
In
Um,
New York, we have an app, Citizens app, so it kind of tells you every single emergency, every crime that's going around. But you're right. These things may go down. I always try to tell people, listen, communications may go down. They may take a while to get back up. If you have a landline, that's great, but there may be some dead time where you can't communicate. So just being emotionally ready to deal with that as well.
well, and I'm a belt and suspenders kind of guy. I believe that you ought to have a backup for the backup to have the backup one more time. So, and I'm a firm believer that if you don't do it operationally, you will never do it in an emergency. So those pieces ought to be used commonly as part of your drill process, so that you're familiar and comfortable with using them. Um, it's just it's a holistic approach to maintaining a safe and secure environment for society's most precious resource.
We use, and it depends on the emergency. We have the public address system in most locations where we can, make an announcement to many people. With the New York City Fire Department and a lot of high-rise office buildings and hotels, we have ARC systems, so additional auxiliary radio communication systems,
Mhm.
even walkie-talkies. Getting information out. Scanners as well. Um, what about incident commanders? I know we touched on that briefly, but what about their role? What is it that the IC, the incident commander, is going to be doing in an emergency, or who's going to take
Depends.
on that role, I should say, too.
Well, again, and we're just in the process of rewriting our reunification process for schools for Idaho, and it's bifurcated. If it's a standalone emergency and you're sending kids home from for a power outage, building administration or district administration is going to be IC on that, because there is not a responding agency to address an issue. If responding agency is showing up to address an issue, they're going to be initial IC, and you're going to tie in with them in a unified command structure. Probably you're going to end up as part of the ops section doing reunification, which is what we should be doing. But that means that you need to understand the incident command system and how it works. And the big part of IC, particularly for building administrators, is a span of control issue, because too many building administrators try to do it all themselves and control it all themselves. And in a crisis, that means things will fall through the crack. So we're big fans of ICS, and one of the requirements for certification as a building administrator in Idaho is ICS 1 and 200, and then 7 and 800.
Yeah, folks, if you're not familiar with that, I will have a link in the description. Great courses that you can take online through FEMA. I encourage you to take them. They're great. Most of them you can probably do within an hour or so. You also will get some continuing education credits for most of them, so it's nice to pad your resume with that as well.
Well, it also means that you understand, if you're not a first responder, that's their vocabulary. And the problem is that the words that first responders use, sometimes the same word to an educator doesn't mean the same thing. So you want to understand the vocabulary when you're tying in together. The principles are the critical element, and that's, span of control, understand that you can delegate and report back, all of those elements of ICS that were so critical in wildfire, which is where it came from and has been translated to generally the entire first responding community.
I think we covered a lot of really good information. I do want to talk about some of the resources that you helped put together for this, so people can take a look at it. This will be in the description, but we'll kind of go over each line item. You and I just talked about this a few minutes ago. Great resource. I can't wait to jump into this. The I Love You Guys website, iloveyouguys.org. Can you tell little people about that?
I Love You Guys is the foundation that was created by John Michael Keyes. John Michael Keyes' daughter, Emily, died in the Bailey, Colorado shooting. And the I Love You Guys Foundation was named for the last text message she sent to her family. And John Michael and his organization have done a wonderful job in helping to create some standard processes that schools can download, because again, most educators do not come to this natively, and it's not part of their training for the job. So there are wonderful resources there. Some of them we in Idaho choose not to use because we needed something that was a little more specific for some of Idaho's conditions. But I really respect the guys at the I Love You Guys Foundation.
Another great organization that you mentioned earlier, NASRO.org, folks. NASRO.org. NASRO, as we talked about.
The National Association of School Resource Officers. And again, it's a group that advocates for school-based law enforcement under the community policing on steroids model, which is integrating those folks into a school and letting them help and become part of the climate and culture of a building. They provide training for SROs, have a national organization. There are many states with organizations. If you have school-based law enforcement and you are an administrator, this is one of the questions on our school assessment is, have you been trained, and what is the training that you have had? So Mo Kennedy is the executive director. It's a great organization. I highly recommend it for school-based law enforcement.
One thing I think that we are both part of, ASISonline.org. Great organization, folks.
ASIS is the international organization for those of us who work in the security world, and they do certification for physical security and protection and a number of things. And right now, I'm in conversation with their education folks on a specific certification for school safety and security. So again, ASIS, if you work in the industry, you should be a member.
Absolutely, totally agree. Great certification process as well, for those that want to go through that. Totally worth it. And a big one of mine, I probably have taken 100 of these already. FEMA's independent study courses. You talked about NIMS and the ICS, which are probably the gold standard, right? If you want to get into this industry, if you want to learn how to talk the talk, NIMS and ICS, great programs.
Absolutely a great program. I've done a huge number of theirs, online stuff. I've been to Emmitsburg on 3 occasions, and I do a little bit of teaching for them. So and if you are in fire, law enforcement, or school security, it's any of the emergency management functions it's a spectacular course and a spectacular organization. The other one that I don't know if do you have the REMS TA Center?
No, actually, that's a good one too. I will add that in the description. REMS TA
REMS,
Center, yeah.
yeah, REMS is the Readiness and Emergency Management Technical Assistance Center, run by the federal government. But REMS TA is a specific place to go and look for that technical assistance. They have not only online resources, but a body you can talk to if you want to know about, in a school, you need a contagion containment protocol. They can give you 2 or 3 that are template processes.
I'll definitely add that to the description. That's a good one as well. One that I had kind of researched and found out about, as I was researching for this episode, protectingOurStudents.org. They help children, they help parents, they help schools prepare for active shooter emergencies. They do training. They just know that students today are stressed, they have anxiety, just general concerns, and this topic, pretty much comes up all of the time. Schools have fire drills, and now they kind of have to prepare for active shooter drills as well, which adds additional stress to them.
And one more that you may or may not have is an organization created by Michelle Gay, a parent of a child lost in the Sandy Hook shooting, and it's the Safe and Sound Schools organization.
Safe and Sound Schools.
Another of
that
those really good elements. And then certainly you can find stuff on our office website, the Idaho Office of School Safety and Security. And there is my contact information if you would like. And we are a small fraternity in school safety and security. I'm always willing to talk to people from wherever. I always gain more out of the conversation and interaction, I think, than I share. So if you would like some information or see something on our website, would like information, please feel free to call me or one of my colleagues. Our contact information is on the website.
Yeah, folks, I gotta say, when I'm going through and just kind of brainstorming an idea of like what topic I would like to do next, Guy was all over this. He's like, if you're talking about school safety, I want to be a part of it. I want to share what I know. So Guy, once again, really, really, really thank you for jumping in. We talked about 4 principles to keep schools safer: the infrastructure, the actual property, crisis communication, the geography, and procedures. Anything else that you would like to add to that, Guy?
No, other than just remember that, and whoever you are, remember that when you're working with a school, schools do not speak cop, and cops generally don't speak schools. So slow down and make sure that you understand one another. It will help you a great deal. 90% of my time is spent translating one to the other. So, but work with your first responders. On that worst of all possible days in a school, they're the folks who are going to show up and help you.
Thank you so much. I always like to end our episodes with a little bit of fun. And past couple of episodes, I picked up a game that I found recently, and I always, like to have a joke or two or a game. So this game that I picked up, it's called the worst case scenario. Uh, you being a expert in safety, I'm gonna give you the worst case scenario. I'll pull a card, and you tell me how you are going to survive. Guy, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, this one, worst case scenario. Tell me how you are going to survive an attempt to jump a motorcycle across a river.
Wow. I wonder why that one came to an Idaho boy. Um, First of all, the worst case scenario is: are you talking about me attempting it? Don't.
You, yeah.
Yeah, don't.
I just don't do it.
Bad idea. Um, my father would call that trying to die of testosterone poisoning. Don't do it. Um, yeah, I mean, check your blood alcohol level immediately.
It's funny because I pulled one for myself, and being a kid from Brooklyn, I don't think I'm going to be shot out of a cannon. So I would say the same thing. Go check my BAC before doing that. Um, Thank you so much once again. I appreciate you joining me this evening, folks. Make sure you check them out. Contact them on LinkedIn as well. Guy, thank you so much again. I really, really appreciate it. You don't know how much this means to me.
Well, again, and we talked about it before. If you want to talk, if they would talk school safety at a bar mitzvah, I'd go. I mean, I'll go anywhere and talk about school safety because this is not only my job, it's my passion, and it's a crusade that I'm on. So thank you very much for giving me the platform.
Awesome stuff. Thank you once again, folks. Check out the other videos. Let me know what other topics you would like to talk about or listen to. Check out the other podcasts on the channel. Thank you. Like, share, subscribe, do all the cool things the kids are doing on YouTube these days. Stay safe. Build those relationships with your local school staff, security agents and peace officers and SROs. Have a great evening, everyone.